Hey guys, it's your friendly neighborhood drink here, and since I heard the news that the Grand Prix and the Supercars are going to happen on the same day and the same track on March, I've gotten a little bit obsessed with car racing. Nah, I just got Forza 7 and I've been playing the shit out of it. Speaking of segways,
Types of racing.
there are a lot of types of racing, so I'm going to go over a few of them. First off, you have endurance races. Endurance races are, well, endurance races. They're long. The cars also look really weird. Yep. Then there's IndyCar, which is a car division with much more pressure on the engineers than the drivers. Not that it's easy, I don't want to open that can of worms. But the tracks are intentionally simple and the restrictions are intentionally loose, so as to give the engineers an easy job making really fast cars. Next, there are stock car races, such as the Australian supercars. These are the polar opposites of Indy. The tracks are intentionally difficult, but the engineers, as the name would suggest, are only allowed to design stock cars. Then there's NASCAR. Most people think that NASCAR is a stock car championship, but I beg to differ. You see, IndyCar works to minimize driver error, so the engineers have one less factor to deal with in design. This is fine, that's the point. Stock car races work to do the opposite, minimize the need for engineers so that it's mostly the drivers doing the work. This is fine, that's the point. What NASCAR does is remove the need for drivers by using the same track as IndyCar, then they remove the need for engineers by using stock cars. So it's just boring. And guess what? This is the racing championship that most of the USA knows about, so there is a large number of people who only think of NASCAR when they think of racing, and so they think racing is boring. No, NASCAR is the boring one. God, I fucking hate Holy shit, is that an M&M car? Yeah, maybe NASCAR isn't that bad. Then there's Formula 1, which is the only one we'll be talking about because it's my favourite, fuck you.
Terminology.
If you were confused when I said stock cars, you'll want to listen here. Stock means no mods. Mods mean changes to the car. Slicks, wets, softs, and hards are all type of tyres that we'll get into later. Downforce is what you're creating with a spoiler and makes you turn better. Understeering is when your back tyres skid. Oversteering is when your front tyres skid. The pits are the little section with your garage and where you get your tyres changed. Straights are big long straight areas. DRS is a system that reduces drag. Drag is when air slows you down. Corners are corners. Banked corners are corners with a tilt. Chicanes are one corner, followed by another corner in the other direction. Racing lines are the ideal line you want to take around a corner. You know what? This deserves a section of its own.
Racing lines.
So a racing line is an imaginary line that would be the ideal line for your car to follow. Look at this corner. Now what would be the quickest way around? It would be easy to think the quickest way around would also be the shortest way around, but that is a very tight turn, which means you'll have to slow down a lot more to avoid losing traction. An ideal racing line finds a balance between the two, where you start on the outside, turn in, hit the apex, and move to the outside again. Life isn't this easy though, like in racing. Let's say after the corner you're going into a straight. In this case, you would want to spend more time accelerating so that you can hit top speed earlier, and every millisecond counts. Then what we do is called a late apex, where we hit the apex late. This means that we start accelerating earlier. Boom, quicker top speed. Then imagine the opposite. Let's say there's a corner with another corner after it. Not quite a chicane, but nearly. In this case, we'll be braking again almost as soon as we're out of the corner, so speed on our way out doesn't really matter as much. In this case, we do what's called an early apex. What's the point of that, I hear you ask? Well, schnookums, if we do an early apex, we can brake later.
Track analysis.
So this corners are cool and all, but let's look at an actual track. How about Yas Marina Circuit in Abu Dhabi because it has cool blue things on it? Turn 1 has nothing fancy so we can go through it normally. Turns 2 and 3 are interesting because they're very smooth turns. This means we can keep our foot on the accelerator all the way through. Turns 5 and 6 are close enough that we can cruise it, meaning no brake or acceleration. Turn 7 is interesting because it's hairpin, meaning hard braking, but it's also followed by a straight, so we want a late apex. You can cruise it through 8 and 9. You can go right through turn 10. Turns 11, 12, and 13 you can cruise it through. 14 is boring. 15 and 16 you can shoot it through. You want to do an early apex at turn 17? Late apex at 18? 19 is boring. Late apex at 20. And that's the course. Boring, right? Well, as with any career, there's a really dull and boring part.
Yep.
So now let's go to the not so boring part.
Teams.
The actual drivers and their personalities are the main part of racing that people enjoy. Watching cars is probably pretty boring if you don't know the people actually driving them. If I went over all the drivers, this would be almost as boring as the track analysis, so I'm just going to talk about the good ones. To whom it may concern, fuck you. Every sport has that one team that sucks. Carlton, Knicks, Nickelback. Everyone thought that Max Verstappen would be shit because he was still a fetus when he started driving. Carlos Sainz is a smooth operator.
Smooth operation.
Daniel Ricciardo is Australian, and he has a really sexy accent.
Okay, you sound husky and beautiful.
And there's absolutely nothing remarkable at any of these. Except this one is pink.
Tires.
If you've actually watched a race, you've probably heard the terms wets or hards. These are in fact not metaphors for penises. So as you might think, different tracks and weather conditions change the way your car will handle. In dry conditions, we use slicks because that means that more of the tyres on the road, so we get more traction. But if it rains, your tyre could be lifted up by the water on the track. It really might not sound that bad, but if you get this wrong, things can go quite fucky-wucky. This is because tyres are basically balloons, right? And by my scientific conclusions, balloons tend to float in water.
I don't have balloons.
If the rain gets heavy enough, the same thing can happen to tyres, meaning braking, steering, and accelerating will do absolutely nothing. So how do wet tyres work? Wet tyres have all ditches and patterns and shit in them, which moves water out of the way. There are two levels of wet tyres. Basically, the more intense the rain, the more pattern there is. Then what about hard and soft? Well, tyres are rubber, right? Wrong! Well, not wrong, but there's also tiny bits of other stuff in the tyres. Steel, nylon, silica, science words. But some of these compounds are more grippy than others. Some have more of the hard things, some have more of the soft things. Soft tyres, or softs, are much grippier than hard tyres, or hards. But soft tyres often wear out a lot quicker, so more pit stops. So teams have to find a balance between the use of soft tyres and hard tyres. It's all complicated, so take my word for it. This section was boring again, so here's another fun thing.
Crashes.
Now for the really fun part. Much like these videos, you humans are far from perfect. Sometimes the drivers make a mistake, sometimes the other drivers make a mistake, and sometimes the person in charge of tyre compounds does a fucky-wucky. Crashes are, well, dangerous, so the organisers and track designers of the Grand Prix have to think about safety. First off, how do you stop the heavy cars from hitting, the fucking audience? This is where we put up fences. We could just put up a normal old fence, like any other sport, and NASCAR, which are really good for hitting the wall, driving parallel to the wall, because they just kind of slow you down. But then if you're going straight into it, well, it'd better be a pretty strong car. So after a tight corner, you might have a tyre wall. Tyre walls squish a little bit because they're tyres and rubbery. But rubber is also frictiony, so if you hit the wall from the side, you're going to spin out, get whiplash, and maybe even break your neck a little bit. Then there's runoff zones. Most of the time grass will do, but if you're coming off at speed and it's not entirely dry, well, fucky-wucky. So coming off a corner, there will usually be gravel. Sometimes the designers just give up and make the whole thing concrete. Maybe with some fancy patterns if you're lucky. Knowing my viewer base, some of you might want to get into dangerous situations like this, so we can get closer to ending this suffering we call schedules, where we repeat the same pattern of wake up, work, rest, sleep, until one day everything goes wrong and it's all over. So let's look at how to get into racing.
Getting into it.
So if I've done my job, you're probably thinking at this point, this is all cool and all, but how do I actually get into racing? Well, my friend, there's one quick and easy trick that almost every single current racer has used to get into the major racing competitions, and that is be rich. So do a major fucky-wucky today and subscribe to my channel.